I'm very happy to present the next speaker, Fredrik von Kieseritzky, a pharmaceutical chemist, a researcher and entrepreneur, and one of the pioneers in introducing cannabis in Sweden as a treatment for chronic pain. Please take the stage.
Thank you. Hello. Oh my God, you're so many. Thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. Can I have like a countdown there so I know? This format is going to be a bit special because I'm supposed to talk for like 25 minutes or so, and then this is going to transition into some sort of a panel discussion, right? Okay, cool. So, my name is Fredrik von Kieseritzky. I have a PhD in organic chemistry. I would like to start with some sort of a conflict of interest declaration or something like that, because I think it is important for researchers to do so. So, who am I? Who am I? All right. So, one part of me is an associated researcher at the Karolinska Institute here in Stockholm. Another part of me is the CEO of a small research company. A third part of me is a board member in the Spinaldus Foundation, a non-governmental organization working with healthcare and research for spinal cord injured persons, also here in Stockholm, Sweden. But I decided to dim all these logos down because I feel that during this talk, I represent myself only, all right? Just to make that clear. And yeah, so let's go ahead and see what pops up. Blank slide. Let's fill it with something. I was told that every good presentation starts with a meme. And this is one of my favorites because I'm serious. This is the scientific method in a couple of words, according to me. Question everything. Why? I love it. Okay. Skipping ahead. This is the graphical summary of my talk, my so-called table of contents. I will talk about medicine. I will talk about law. And can these two unite into some sort of love? That's the question. A disclaimer. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a medicinal chemist. What does that mean? Well, since I did my PhD in 2004, I have worked with drug discovery in industry. I worked for quite a long time for Big Pharma as a researcher for the past 5 or 6 years in our own smaller company. I work for the past 2 or 3 years. I work quite close to treating physicians, aiding them to give non-approved medicines to patients with special needs. Also, I am not at all a lawyer, but when you work with these things, you have to have some sort of a basic understanding of law. It's important. And I have some hands-on experience. I've been appointed expert witness in 6 or 7, I think, criminal trials regarding drugs. So, what could possibly go wrong? I like the term used by the previous speaker, the Nixonian definitions of drugs. These are the 5 drug schedules, and this is US law. But what's interesting about this is that the Swedish law is almost a perfect carbon copy of these 5 schedules. So this red, let me see, this red y-axis is increasing badassness or something, or Schedule 1, or the most dangerous drugs which have no medical use whatsoever. That's drugs like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, cannabis. And then we have Schedule 2. These are dangerous drugs with medical use, morphine, amphetamines. And then there is a descending order of, well, let me see. Okay, so low potential for abuse and risk of dependence, benzodiazepines. All right, interesting. This is the law. And Schedule 5 is special because it's, I should say, how drugs end up in these schedules. It's via 2 different mechanisms. One is we have the United Nations drug treaties, and all member states are, it's mandatory for member states to include drugs listed by the UN in their national law. But countries can also add their own drugs, and that's Schedule 5 basically. But, and this is important, member states cannot exclude any drug from the United Nations lists. So member states are not free to say, oh, cannabis is not a drug in our country. We can't do that. There's no legal pathway for it. Fantastic. So as a researcher, you have access to these fantastic databases, and I will show you one of them. It's called Google. Very funny. So I did a search for rescheduling plus drugs. So this is just random news containing the words rescheduling and drugs. The first one that popped up on my screen was this one. I think we have the guilty persons behind it in the audience today. This is about magic mushrooms, must be made available as a medicine. This one is a bit weird. Feds reschedule CBD. I thought, well, I'm not American, but I thought feds meant the FBI. And what do they have to do with drugs? I'm not sure. The United Kingdom to reschedule medicinal cannabis. Okay, interesting. Scientific Americans, psychedelics, as I've already said, reside in Schedule 1. Okay. MDMA, Schedule 1. No, the DEA did not reschedule the CBD compound. Okay, is it the feds, the FDA, or I don't know. So the question is, or we really need to reschedule a number of drugs, don't we? Or do we? Let's find out. This has been shown in a number of presentations before mine. You know how the story goes. There is virtually no correlation between drug harm and the different drug schedules. It's very difficult to draw any sort of correlation here. I mean, we have let's say alcohol here. It's not a drug, Okay, interesting. Heroin, well, dangerous drug, Schedule 1. Well, okay, I'll come back to heroin. We have magic mushrooms. Oh, there's this word. You get it. It gets even more confusing. And my concern as a researcher is that if I, as a scientist, can't understand the law, how can, for example, courts and ethical committees be expected to do so? So I would like you to take half a minute to try and decipher the following paragraph, which is internationally binding law for all of us. And I'll have a cup of water meanwhile. Anyone? No volunteers? Not a single healthy volunteer. This is my conclusion, what this says. W-T. I mean, this is crazy. This is batshit crazy. If a Schedule 1 drug is especially dangerous, then it can be placed in Schedule 4. Okay. Not okay. So, I thought we'd have a vote. Are UN drug conventions really a barrier to healthcare and research? And those who say yes, raise your hands, please. Interesting. No. Okay, yes, it's a clear winner. Let's see. And also compare with the headlines I showed you in the previous slide. Here's what the 1961 Single Drug Convention actually says. We must prohibit the production, manufacture, blah, 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 but we must make these drugs available for research, medical and scientific use, including clinical trials, regardless of which schedule they're in. Isn't this amazing? This is international law. So it appears as if UN drug conventions are globally misinterpreted. And I had misinterpreted them for a long time, and I guess the majority of us had and have and will continue to do. This is an example. I mentioned this briefly in the UK. The first line treatment for post-op pain and after C-section is heroin. Did you know? Schedule 1. And it's not a pill. It's not IV. It's an first line treatment is to inject it into the spinal cord. A Schedule 1 compound. First line treatment. So isn't this indirect evidence that medical use of Schedule 1 substances may be okay with national and international law? I think so. And I would like to make an apology because I have to break a fundamental rule. I know that when this NPV was formed, on day one, they wisely decided that we never mention cannabis. But I have to, in order to continue this presentation. So I'm sorry, I have to bend the rule. Why weed here and now? Cannabis has a number of interesting properties, and I could give 3 different lectures about that. But it has one interesting property which is relevant to this presentation, and that is that cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, according to the United Nations and almost every nation on Earth. And it will change in 2 or 3 days in Canada, I know, but so. So my feather in the hat in all this, and a big caveat. This is probably not the least impressive to my colleagues in the US or even the United Kingdom, but nevertheless, I have assisted a number of Swedish doctors in prescribing herbal cannabis, which is a Schedule I drug, for mostly treatment-resistant neuropathic pain. So, Schedule I substance in humans in Sweden, check. Reflection. So, as our team is currently doing research on herbal cannabis in Sweden on humans, we have shown that it can be done here within our legal framework. So my idea and suggestion is that can we extrapolate and use our experiences with using Schedule I substances? How about psychedelics? Any takers? No? Okay. In Sweden. And as you've seen, all of this is very much focused on Sweden, but you'll have to live with that. I'll come back to the law. The law is a necessary evil. So the basic principle is when you give there are only two ways to legally give a human being a drug. And that is either in healthcare or in research. And in general, you have to pick one of the two. Beforehand, you have to decide, this is a patient and I'm treating you within the realms of healthcare, or you're in a clinical trial. So clinical trials are not carried out to cure the sick, but to produce evidence. And the objective of healthcare is not to produce scientific evidence. And I know that there are gray zones, but this is the basic principle. So let's list a couple of options you have as a treating physician in healthcare. And specifically, non-approved drugs by prescription. So details vary very much from one country to the other, and it's not at all harmonized within the European Union either. So basically, you have four options as a physician, at least in Sweden. The first one is individual exemption, and the British term for it is unlicensed specials. And I couldn't find the US term for it. Does anybody know? No? Can an American physician prescribe a non-approved drug via some sort of exemption? No one knows. Okay. Then we have something called general exemptions, and that is an exemption for a specific clinic. So a clinic gets an exemption so that every physician employed by that clinic may prescribe without having to submit applications for each and every prescription. Then we have something called compassionate use, or it's called expanded access in the US. And that is for drugs that mostly a phase 3 is completed but is pending market approval. And that is typically a time period between 1 to 3 years. And then you can say that it's unethical not to treat during that time, and then you can start a compassionate use program. And well, extempore drugs are interesting. And a fifth option, which is an option if the drug is available, such as ketamine, you can prescribe it off-label, but you know this. And Interestingly, ketamine is used quite widely in Sweden against pain primarily. But there have been no clinical trials, but physicians do it. So options in research are limited. In Sweden, at least, there is only one legal option. If you're not doing, if you're not in healthcare and you give a person a drug, you have to do it within the context of a clinical trial. And a clinical trial, you need ethics, you need a protocol approved, and you need access to a study drug. And why did I put this as a bullet? Because I know by experience that many academic researchers don't really consider this one before it's too late. They get ethical approval, an approved protocol, and whoops, there are no manufacturers willing to deliver the drug. That's no good. So, shortly about CTMs, or clinical trial materials, also known as study drugs. Study drugs must be manufactured under GMP, and I have a slide about that. The typical CTM manufacturer will not give you a quote for a Schedule 1 study drug, regardless of how many certificates and exemptions and blah, blah, blah that you have. This is insanely frustrating. And the cost of manufacture for a CTM is insanely high. You need to plan ahead for this when you conduct a clinical trial, especially in academia, where funding is more limited than in industry, typically. Another thing is that transporting Schedule 1 substance across nation borders is virtually impossible. I have a couple of stories about this, but it's very, very hard. So my advice would be, try and manufacture in your home country. It will save you lots of work. GMP 101. See, I'm running short on time, so GMP is a legal framework. I can take the top and bottom maybe. It's a there are laws that decide the processes for manufacturing pharmaceuticals, and I call it a necessary evil, but the overall intention is good, and that is to minimize the risk of harm from occurring to end users. Clinical trials in academia, yes, please. And I worked in industry, and I worked in academia, and these are my suggestions, or yeah. So please consider a placebo-controlled randomized trial over an open-label study. Open-label studies will give you a nice publication or two, and you will get some creds from your researcher colleagues, but the regulatory authorities that approve drugs, they think very little of open-label studies. Well, I'm sure you'll make this slide available, so I'll just skip ahead. So, to wrap this up, law is objectively confusing. Anybody disagrees? No? Yes? Conducting research on Schedule 1 substances requires blood, sweat, and tears, but it is not impossible, not even in Sweden. And I'm a living proof of it because I'm doing it. I'm not in jail. So, And this one is good. It requires no change of current national law. You only need to learn how to navigate it. And such research, as has been demonstrated throughout these 2 intense days, is insanely relevant and important. So please just do it. I started with a meme. I'll end with a life. I'm a sucker for life wisdoms. If you understand this one, you probably you're either high or need to see a psychiatrist. This is generated by so-called artificial intelligence. No. This is what I wanted to summarize my talk with. To beat the system, be the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fredrik, for this very action-oriented talk.